والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. سبحانك لا فهم لنا إلا ما فهمتنا إنك أنت الجواد الكريم والرب زد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. أحل لكم ليلة الصيام الرفث إلى نسائكم هن لباس لكم وأنتم لباس لهن علم الله أنكم كنتم تختانون أنفسكم فتاب عليكم وعفى عنكم فالآن باشروهن وابتغوا ما كتب الله لكم وكلوا واشربوا حتى يتبين لكم الخيط الأبيض من الخيط الأسود من الفجر ثم أتموا الصيام إلى الليل ولا تباشروهن وأنتم عاكفون في المساجد تلك حدود الله فلا تقربوها كذلك يبين الله آياته للناس لعلهم يتقون. صدق الله مولانا العظيم. So continuing with the discussion on these ayats which we read yesterday, and we described the basic tafsir. So there's a few points that we wanted to mention today. So number one, it's been mentioned here in the beginning of these verses that the marital relationship is legal in the night at the time of after the setting of the sun up until the break of dawn, just as eating and drinking is also legal at that time. Now, the question may arise that suppose one finds oneself in the state of janaba, of ritual impurity through marital relationships at the time of dawn, and he hasn't taken a ghusl until now. So now what's the ruling? The ruling is that this is not going to impact the fast. Fast is fine. It won't impact the fast. However, when taking the ghusl, so one should not gargle, deeply, because gargling deeply with the water in what we call madmada. So there's the possibility, very strong possibility, that some of that water may enter into the throat and enter into the stomach, and therefore the fast will be broken. So, being in a state of impurity at the time of dawn is not going to impact the fast. However, caution should be taken in performing ghusl in that state, so that water does not enter into the throat and then ultimately into the stomach, and the fast is broken. Similarly, if one happens to fall asleep and then there's a wet dream, for example. So in that case, similarly, the same injunction takes place. It will not affect the fast. However, it will be necessary to be careful in taking ghusl that water doesn't enter into the stomach. Okay, the next thing is the time of the breaking of fast and the time of ending of fast. And this is very critical because some of us may be over, cautious, and some of us may be under cautious. Both extremes are, dangerous, and the middle course, moderation, is always the golden median. So, number one, in breaking of the fast. So, if we are in a position where we actually see, for example, we are at the beach and we are watching the sun set into the ocean. Obviously, it's not setting into the ocean, but as the optical illusion appears. So when we see the entirety of the sun totally gone out of sight, this is the time when Maghrib begins and the time of the breaking of fast begins. So if we see that physically, then obviously there's no question or doubt. If we are not seeing that, which most of us would not be seeing that, and because most of us depend upon various calculations, and you'll find that these calculations, there's discrepancy, a minute or 2 minutes or 3 minutes. So if we break the fast 5 seconds or even 1 second before the actual setting of the sun, fast is spoiled. And if we come to know about that, then we'll have to make a qada of that fast. Therefore, and it's a practice here that I've seen all over the place, is that even at the very minute that the schedule says to call the adhan or the gives for Maghrib, people are calling it, even sometimes before that. This is very dangerous. Number one, the adhan is not actually taking place in the proper time. Number two, if it's Ramadan, not only, the person is going to be, responsible for that, but the people who are breaking their fast are going to be responsible for the wrong breaking of fast of all the people who have broken their fast prematurely. So we have to be very careful. To wait a couple, 2, 3 minutes is the standard practice. Whatever the time is showing on the chart, give another 2 or 3 minutes and then call the adhan, and then break the fast. Waiting 2 or 3 minutes or 5 minutes or 10 minutes is not going to be a problem. Yes, we don't unnecessarily delay. That's also not to be done. However, breaking the fast before the time, there's a big problem. So we have to be very careful about that. Secondly, at the time of imsak, or the time that we have to stop. So it's very clear in the ayat that when it becomes clear that night is finished and day has begun, and that would be seen in a very clear night in a place where you don't have light pollution. If you're looking at the horizon on the eastern horizon, then the very beginning of the very first notice of dawn, and which is what we call dawn as-sadiq, as-subh as-sadiq, which is, as the ayat depicts, it is like a fine thread right across the horizon. First, there is what is called as-subh al-kadhib, which is a light which goes up into the sky and then also retracts after a short period of time. This is not actually the beginning of Fajr. After that, shortly after that, a very small line, very scant line of light will appear. That is actually what we call Subh as-Sadiq. So this is when fasting becomes mandatory, what we call imsak. Now, again, if someone in a clear atmosphere without light pollution and other pollution, atmospheric pollution, is actually able to see that, then it would be very clear to them. If we don't have that facility, which 99.999% of us would not have, so now what we have to do, we have to depend on the timings. Again, ahead of that, a minute or two or three or five is not going to be a problem. Going beyond that time knowingly is a big problem. Even if knowingly we go beyond that time and continue eating and drinking, and people sometimes do this. The adhan is being called, the time is definitely entered, and now people are continuing eating and drinking, their fast is gone. Okay? However, remaining 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes, again, sahur, Nabi Sallallahu mentions to keep it, as close to dawn as possible. But with a provision that we don't get into a doubtful time period. And if we go past the time period and it's doubtful and it comes to be known that we have actually been eating at the time that Fajr has entered, we have to make qada. And if knowingly, not only qada but kafara. So we need to be very careful about that. So again, khulasat summary of that, at the time of Maghrib, waiting a few minutes is the practice. And be very careful about that. At the time of imsak, the practice again is the opposite. Waiting, imsak or cutting off from food and drink and otherwise before actual dawn a few minutes. And with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's tawfiq. Last, there is a little bit of discussion on i'tikaf. We'll deepen that for tomorrow, inshallah. Wassalamu alaikum.